Okay, so we're going to start off with our prayer as usual, that our learning should go in the right direction. And then I'll tell you about why I chose this particular topic for now. ריבון עולמים ואדוני אדונים, אב הרחמן והסליחות, מודים אנחנו לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו, בקידה בשתחוויה, שקרבתנו לתורתך לעבודתך עבודת הקודש, ונתת לנו חלק בסודות תורתך הקדושה, מה אנו ומה חיינו, אשר עשית עמנו חסד גדול כזה. על כן אנחנו מפילים תחנוננו לפניך, שתמחור ותסלח לכל חטאותינו ועוונותינו, ועל יהיו עוונותינו מבדילים בינינו לביניך, וכן יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו, שתכונן את לבבינו לראותך ולבדך, תקשיב אוזניך לדברינו אלה, ותפתח לבבינו הערל בסודות תורתך, ולימודנו זה נחת רוח, לפני כסי כבודך כרך ניחוח. תציל עלינו אור מקור נשמתנו בכל בחינתנו, שיתנוצצו ניצוצות עבודיך הקדושים, אשר על ידם גלית את דבריך אלה בעולם, וזכותם וזכות אבותם, וזכות תורתם ותמימותם וקדושתם, ימוד לנו לבל נקשר בדברים אלו, ובזכותם תהננו במה שאנו אומרים, במה שאנחנו לומדים, מאמר נעים זמירות ישראל, גל עיניי והביט הנפלאות מתורתך, כי אדוני תן חוכמה מפיו דעת ותבונה, יהיו לו רצונים מפי, ויגון ליבי לפניך, אדוני צורי וגואלי. Master of the universe and Lord of lords, Father of mercy and forgiveness, we give thanks before you, O Lord our God and God of our fathers, bowing the head and prostrating ourselves, that you brought us close to your Torah and to your service, the holiest of services, and you've given us a portion in the inner meanings of your holy Torah. What are we and what is our life, that you've dealt with us in such a great loving kindness as this? Therefore we lay our supplication before you, that you pardon and forgive all our sins and iniquities, and do not let our iniquities separate us from you. And may it be your will, O Lord our God and God of our fathers, that you prepare our hearts to have reverence of you and love of you. And may your ears listen to these our words. Open our uncircumcised heart in the inner meanings of your Torah. May this our learning rise up, give pleasure before the throne of your glory as a sweet-smelling fragrance. May it bestow upon us the light of the source of our soul in all its aspects. And may the sparks of your holy servants, to whom you revealed these your words into the world, shine forth, and may their merit, the merit of their fathers, the merit of their Torah, their wholeness and holiness, stand by us, that we do not stumble in these words. And through their merit, enlighten our eyes on what we are learning. As the sweet singer of Israel said, open my eyes and I will look on the wonders of your Torah. For the Lord gives wisdom from his mouth, knowledge and understanding. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable before you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Do you know, I've suddenly realised I've left my speaker in the kitchen. Hold on a second, no wonder I couldn't hear anything. One moment. Sorry about that, everyone. Oh, somebody's waiting to come in. There we go. Oh, somebody get her in. Okay, a little bit of technical dealings. Okay. Let's hope this thing works. Doesn't always. That's it. Right, I might actually be able to hear somebody now. Okay, sorry about that, everyone. Okay, now then. Yes. What I wanted to do is, first of all, I wanted to share with you why I chose this topic for now. It's the beginning of the 3 weeks, and today, of course, was the 17th of Tammuz, when we remember the destruction of the temple, the beginning of the destruction of the temple, when the walls of Jerusalem were first breached. But that's not the beginning of the 17th of Tammuz. The 17th of Tammuz is actually the day when the golden calf, the sin of the golden calf, took place. And in my view, that's actually the most relevant bit of what happens. Moses went up the mountain on the 6th day of Sivan, or 5th day of Sivan, whichever way you want to count it, doesn't really matter. 6th day of Sivan, okay? And he goes, that's the day of the giving of the Torah. That's the day when God's voice spoke to all the Jewish people assembled at the foot of the mountain, and we heard God actually speaking to us and telling us the first 2 of the commandments. And what's really remarkable was the approach of the Jewish people, the children of Israel, to that extraordinary event. And they come to the mountain ke'ish echad belev echad, as one man with one voice. And I think this is just incredible. It really is incredible. One hand with one heart, sorry. So they come completely unified. And the only way they can come unified is through giving, is through faith. Because when we are on an aspect of giving, we come into what's called affinity of form. We come into affinity of form with God, and therefore we're able to become together as people as well. When we are in the aspect of receiving for ourselves alone, just taking, we separate, okay? We separate from God, and we separate from each other as well, because each one of us has within us a godly element. So the only way we can actually come ke'ish echad belev echad is through giving and being in the framework of holiness. Now, why is giving being connected with the framework of holiness? We'll look at that in a minute. But what happens when we take the framework of holiness, we take vessels which should be in the framework of holiness, and we use them wrongly? Now, the classic, the first example of this was not actually the sin of the golden calf, which is the one that we are remembering today. I won't say celebrating, because it's not a celebration. It's the one which we remember today. But of course, the very first one, which is in the history of humankind, is the tree of knowledge, when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. But if you look through the Torah, there are many examples. And I think that one of the reasons that these examples are given to us is so that we should know how not to do it. All right? It's not a historical document. The Zohar is extremely clear on that the Torah is not to tell us stories of historical chronicles, okay? And it's not an issue of sentimentality, like, you know, do we remember Jerusalem, you know, sentimentality or anything like that. It's absolutely not to do with that. It's to do with our living relationship with God here and now. And therefore these episodes and events which are told to us in the Torah are not told to us in order that we should, you know, go into become historians, but in order that we should know how to live our lives in the present. Okay? And they're all, if you like, sort of these archetypical ways in which we can leave the framework of holiness, God forbid, and get into the framework of evil. So we're going to look at these today. And before we go into that, the first thing I want to look at is the very, very, very first event of what's called the breaking of the vessels, where vessels which were in the framework of holiness actually quite inadvertently left the framework of holiness and went into the framework of evil. And that set up the whole pattern that we then see later on. Okay? Right. Is everybody okay with what we've said so far? Is there any questions?
Okay.
No? Oh yeah, you want a question?
So far, so good.
All right, that's great then. Okay, but you can pop things on the chat or you can yell out or whatever you want to do. Now, share screen. I got a picture up here somewhere. There it is. Share. Okay, I made this picture a while ago. Is it big enough? Maybe I can make it bigger. Let's do view. Let's get rid of all these other things we don't need.
Mhm.
Uh, page layout. Let's do. Oh, I don't know. There's no way to see it, so we full screen.
It's okay. It's okay.
It's okay. It's not okay. 1 minute. That didn't work. Oh, how do I go back now? Oh, close. It's okay like that. Can you see it?
There's a zoom option.
A zoom. Oh, right. You're right. There is zoom.
Gotta zoom.
It was at 100, so you can customize it maybe like
That's
125.
better. There you go. I'm a genius. All right.
Very nice.
Okay, so there we go. So where do we stop? We're starting off as we always start off with the Ein Sof. Okay? And the Ein Sof, the infinite Baruch Hu, is the purpose of creation, is the will to give goodness to all created beings. And in the Ein Sof, the light, which is God's goodness, and the vessels which the vessel which wants to receive that goodness, it's all one. In the inner meaning of Shmo Echad, he and his name are one. Now, from the Ein Sof, what actually develops is that the first thing that happens is Tzimtzum. Okay? And what that's not on the picture. The idea of Tzimtzum is that the vessel of the Ein Sof wanted to become even more together with the light. And you could say, well, how can it be more when they were one? And it boggles the imagination completely. In fact, the Zohar says this is one of the wonders of God. We cannot understand this. But the vessel at some point felt that it was receiving while the light was giving. And there is in fact a spiritual principle which says that every branch wants to be like its root. And since the beginning of everything, the root of everything is God's goodness, which is called the light. So the vessel wanted to become like the light, and it wanted to be giving. So at this point, once it's made that decision, okay, we then have that everything that abides by that decision is called the framework of holiness. And any element which does not abide by that decision is going to become the framework of evil. All right? And what we find is that the soul develops down through the framework of holiness. It goes through a whole system of worlds where it can only, its primary function is giving, and it only receives what it's able to receive only if by doing so it's giving pleasure to God or to its fellow creature. Whereas the framework of evil is just basically carrying on, receiving. I just want to receive. Okay? So it's at this point when that decision has been made that you beget these two potential frameworks. All right? And they go down through the worlds, through the worlds of the first world, which comes forth, which abides by this system, is called Adam Kadmon. And then in the next world, which actually is called the world of Nikodim, which you've probably never heard of. And the reason you've never heard of it is because that's where the Shvirat HaKelim took place. All right? And that's why you've never heard of it, because it broke. Okay? And in fact, the world of Atzilut, which comes after the world of Nikodim, comes to repair the world of Nikodim, and we carry on Atzilut, Bria, Yitzira, and Asiyah, which are the names of the worlds. So what happens in the world of Nicodim? It starts off perfectly okay. It starts off in the framework of holiness, okay? And all the vessels are all lined up properly, and they're all giving properly, okay? Only receiving for the sake of giving. And then what actually happens was, very inadvertently, some vessels which were very small and didn't have much capacity inadvertently attracted too great a light. They were just overwhelmed. Instead of being able to give back the light that they were handled, all their mechanisms were completely overwhelmed, and they began to receive for themselves alone. And that's what's called Shvirat HaKelim. Shvirat HaKelim is when vessels which should be in the framework of holiness, by accident or on purpose, start to receive for themselves alone. So light which should be in the framework of holiness actually it leaks out, okay, and gets into the framework of evil, which therefore gets light which it shouldn't really get, okay, and then that framework of evil becomes bigger, more powerful. And that's why the analogy is of a broken vessel, because if you have a broken a vessel, you know, like a jar with wine in it, okay, and you smash the jar, the wine leaks out, okay, goes everywhere. And that's exactly what happens with Shvirat HaKelim. That vessels which should be containing the light of holiness are actually giving their light to the framework of evil. Now, the original Shvirat HaKelim, which happened in the world of Nicodim, was quite inadvertent from the perspective of the vessels. All right? Not from the perspective, interestingly enough, of God. Okay? God intended it. Okay? There's no accidents. God intended it to happen. Okay? And he had reasons for it, because it was part of what the job of man actually is, to pick up these broken vessels and mend them and bring them back into holiness. So, as regards the worlds, the Shvirat HaKelim, the first time that vessels actually received for themselves alone in actual practice, okay, is in the world of Nicodim. Okay. There's a chat. What does the chat say? Not clear to me, Yocheved says, not clear to me why the tree of knowledge should be part of the framework of evil. Seems that the tree should be considered neutral and part of the framework of holiness at best. Would it be possible to explain this? Yes. Okay, well, we haven't quite got to the tree of knowledge. We were just going to get there. Okay. So, the Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden start off in the framework of holiness, as actually Yocheved was wondering. Yes, it starts off in they start off in the framework of holiness. In the Garden of Eden, they are in the framework of holiness. They've only basically got one command, which is to eat from all the trees in the garden, but not to eat from the tree of knowledge, because God says, if you do, you will surely die. Okay? There was, however, one representative of the framework of evil in the garden. Now, Yocheved's just asked a question. She says, why was the tree of knowledge considered evil? Well, it belongs to the framework, the Halal Panoi, the framework of evil. Now, the Halal Panoi is the empty space. It's the vessels which are not yet being brought into holiness. I should have said, probably, that the framework of holiness compared with the potentially framework of evil is actually quite small, at least when it starts off. if we were to look at, let's say, you've got 100% vessel in the Ein Sof, all right? 20% would belong to the framework of holiness, which would be able to receive only for the sake of giving and just simply to be able to do giving. But most of the vessel, 80%, maybe 90%, would be called the Chalala Panoi, the empty space. Now, so long as it's not being used, that empty space is, as Yocheved said, neutral. However, when we actually use it to receive oneself alone, it becomes the framework of evil. So the Chalala Panoi is not, the empty space is not negative in itself. It simply means a vessel which is not being used, but it does have the will to receive. If it's actually used, it becomes the framework of evil. So the tree of knowledge was actually the main tree, if you like, in the garden. It's the vessel, okay? But they were warned not to eat from it. They said, the day you eat from it, you will surely die, because it was the main vessel for receiving. The other trees represent the trees of giving. Okay? Now, when Adam and Eve were in the garden, Eve, who had great understanding, the Torah actually says, the Talmud says, I apologize, the Talmud says that the woman had bina yetzirah, more understanding, okay? She was born, she was built from Adam's side, and she had bina yetzirah, okay? And I'll look at that chat in a moment. And she had bina yetzirah, and she understood that the purpose of the human being was in fact to bring the whole of that vessel, the whole of the Chalala Panoi, into Kedusha. She understood that. She, in a way, to correct all the framework of evil, to correct all the broken vessels, all those vessels which from the world of Nikodim had fallen into the framework of evil, but when the early vessels of the world of Nikodim had received for themselves alone, a lot of them were brought back in the world of Atzilut, but not all of them. And what's left, she says, that's for the human being to do. And she was right about that. That is the job of the human being. It is the job to correct all the vessels which have gone into the framework of evil and bring them into holiness. What was the mistake was the same mistake has happened in the framework of the world of Nikodim. She only had a certain capacity, and the power of that light was too great. And she and Adam ate the first time in holiness, trying to bring that tremendous power, the tremendous light into holiness, and ultimately they were overcome by it, and they received it for themselves alone. And that's when it says Mot Yamutu. Mavet in Kabbalah does not necessarily mean physical death, it means separation. And they became separated from the Creator. And the body, which was actually Adam's eternal body, left him. His soul left him, his body changed, and he became, actually made all the present human community, past, present and future, all makes up together the one soul of Adam. And our role now, okay, is to pick up all those bits of broken vessels which come from the world of Nikodim and come also from the sin of Adam, and bring them back into holiness. Okay? So how does that happen? So in the human being, somebody, 1 minute, before I say how does that happen, I saw there was a chat and I forgot. Chat. Doris, the tree of life and knowledge are not the same. No, they're not. They're two different trees. The tree of life is the tree of holiness, okay, often referred to as faith, okay. When somebody's got a lot of faith, he's holding on to the tree of life. The tree of life gives you eternal life. The tree of knowledge is of good and evil, is the tree of basically the will to receive. Okay, that's the will to give, and that's the will to receive. Okay, sort of like, yeah, okay, all right. So in man, we have two frameworks in the one being, because if we're going to create something, we've actually got to have it inside of us. So we've got within ourselves what's called the Yitzchak P, the will to give unconditionally, the framework of holiness, the soul, and we've got the Yitzchak, which is the will to receive ourselves alone, which we call the body, which we also call the ego. Okay? And the purpose of the human being is to take elements from the framework of evil and move them into the framework of holiness. That's our purpose. So we get the framework of evil as we're children. We get the desires for power, we get the desires for anger, we get the desires for lust, greed, whatever you name it, we get it as children. The psychologists were quite right about that. The seeds of our difficulties are in our childhood. All right, that's the time when our will to receive for ourselves alone grows, our ego grows. Okay, and then with the beginning of the work of Torah and mitzvot, okay, which we start when we're bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, we gradually are meant to take elements of the framework of evil and bring them into holiness. Take our anger and use it for social justice. Take our greed and use it for become a source for tzedakah, for giving. Okay, whatever we can do, we can take those vessels and bring them into holiness. But what happens when we do the opposite? What happens if instead of doing what we're meant to be doing, it goes in the wrong direction? Okay? Now it could do. Man's been given free choice. Right? We've been given free choice. So we can take stuff and get it to go from the broken vessels and bring them into holiness, which is what we're meant to be doing. Or we could do it the opposite way around and take the stuff from holiness and use it for the negative. And that is actually a lot of times what we do. Well, not necessarily all the time, let's be too harsh. Okay? So the Torah tells us the story of our relationships with God. And it's not a story of a historical document like we said before. It's actually a discussion of what our relationship with God can be in both directions. So I began to think about what examples of Shvirat HaKelim do we have. Now, the one that we commemorated today is the sin of the golden calf. But if we think about it, there were others before that. I started to make a list for myself earlier. I think it might be that one. Yes, you probably can't see that. Oh, wait a minute. Can you see that if I share that? Or are you still seeing the previous thing? You're probably seeing the previous thing.
We're still seeing the previous thing.
Yeah, thanks. It's so confusing. You know, on the Skype, it's much easier. I have to tell you, everybody. I'm a Skype fan, not a Zoom fan. But however, that's it. I think I've done it. I'm a genius. Now, you probably can't see that. Let me make that nice and big. There we are. All right. So I started to make for myself just a few to look at the different examples of Shvirat HaKelim that we have in the Torah. Now, I don't think the point of just telling us that these things happened is the real point of it. I think the point of it is to show us it can happen in many different ways, all right? Because they're not the same at all. If you go into the stories deeply, we discover that the idea, the way that Shvirat HaKelim can happens in different forms. And I think only by knowing that can we actually guard ourselves from our breaking the vessels in our own lives, because we don't want to do that. When we break the vessels in our own lives, we cause absolute havoc. We might feel good at the moment, if we lose our tempers or something. We might feel powerful at the moment, but the havoc that we create is just incalculable, because what we're actually doing is bringing light, which should be in the framework of holiness, and giving it as a present to the framework of evil. And then when we wonder why evil has grown in the world, it's kind of, we shouldn't be so surprised. So let's have a look at this in a little bit more detail. The tree of knowledge. What we've already said, the sin of the tree of knowledge, is that Adam and Eve had good intentions, but they were simply overwhelmed by the amount of light there. That's absolutely equivalent to what happened in the original Shvirat HaKelim in the world of Nicodim. And I can't take you there into the world of the Ari right now, because it really is a big topic just on its own, okay? And there's a lot of terminology, so you'll just have to accept that from me, that it is absolutely equivalent. So the Shvirat HaKelim in the worlds, which happened in the world of Nicodim, and in the tree of knowledge, is completely identical, all right? And it's also known, Ba'alilah Hanora Asa Zot, it's in Tehillim somewhere, that God, who's called Hanora, the awesome one, Ba'alilah, on purpose, did this. So we know that the whole issue of the Shvirat HaKelim is meant to happen, okay? That somehow or other the negative is meant to be a part of our lives. Now then, there was a thing came in, chat. Is there also the grieving for the inner Jerusalem? Yes, that's right. Mourning for the inner Jerusalem. Yes, we'll get to that. We will. Okay. Cain and Abel. It's very interesting to me that out of the two people who offered up the sacrifice, first of all, the idea for the sacrifice seemed to have originated from Cain. All right? He was the one who had the idea for the sacrifice in the first place. And who is the one that God speaks to more than once? Cain. This whole conversation, this whole walking around with God, it's Cain he's talking to. All right? So, again, there's a feeling of Cain is, in the Zohar, the elements, the framework of holiness and the framework of evil had now got mixed in the human being. Once he ate from the tree of knowledge, the Adam and Eve both have both aspects within them, just like we have, okay? And they were I think at that point, they were very unaware of what they had. Cain got all the framework of evil. Abel got all the framework of goodness. All right? And it was a very unbalanced situation. Cain actually was the more powerful. Okay? We can see that. He was the one who decided to do the sacrifice. He was the one who God spoke to. And yet he was totally unbalanced. All right? And so we see this horrific murder of Abel, his passions, his jealousy, and we can just see how passion, jealousy, anger, all these things can get right out of balance, okay, and lead us into very negative spaces. And so we've got a powerful vessel which is being used wrongly out of like overwhelming emotion. But yet you can see that out of the two vessels, Cain's is in fact the most powerful. So I think about that. I think that's very interesting. Okay. Sometimes, I think the lesson for that for me was, sometimes it's better to take a lower back seat, tone down the power, don't get so worked up, cool down, okay? Because too much power there can cause us to fall into the very wrong framework of evil. That vessels which should be in the framework of holiness, Cain should have been able to bring it into the framework of holiness. God warned him. He says, Atayachol, he said, you're able to overcome it. Sin is crouching at the door, but if you want to, you can deal with it. So God was egging him on. God was encouraging him. But he didn't listen. And I think also that when we're overcome with a lot of power, we tend not to listen to the still small voice within. And then we can be using those vessels which should remain in holiness, and they can fall into evil, and the whole framework of evil develop from there. And we know Cain had lots of descendants, all right? So it has consequences. Esau's a very interesting point. Esau is, again, a figure who is powerful, side, okay? He has the potential for holiness. We know that because it says, I can't remember where, but that this head aspect was in holiness. I think it's in the Zohar. But so he had the potential. The head aspect is the potential of a person, but his actions went completely into evil. So here you've got a dichotomy where you've got the idea of something is positive, but the carrying of it out is negative. All right. Esau, very interesting enough, is very much associated with the breaking of the vessels, because again, here is the firstborn of Isaac, should have been, and Rivka, you would think would be holy. He was taught by Abraham. He was the son of Yitzchak. Yitzchak loved him. He had tremendous vessels, much bigger, by the way, than Yaakov's vessels were, much bigger. He had the potential. He had the Rosh, was his aspect was in holiness, but he didn't follow it through into holiness. Okay, he allowed the temptations of the world to overtake him. So this is another way that the Shvirat HaKelim can happen. And again, these are all different ways that it can happen with us, God forbid. And I think that the meaning of these stories is not historical, but is actually to look at the different ways in which these stories actually reflect the different ways in which we ourselves could, God forbid, take vessels from the framework of holiness and put them in the framework of evil. The golden calf. Golden calf's an interesting one. It's very odd, isn't it? When you think about it, you think it sounds completely mad. You know, we've just received the great Torah. Okay, we stood at Mount Sinai. We've been using are vessels for faith. We've come together as ish echad b'lev echad. Okay, what happened? You know, there's Moses up on the mountain getting the Torah for us. What happened? Well, I think you can look at it in different ways. Certainly, the tremendous light of God that we received at Mount Sinai could have been like the tree of knowledge, like overwhelming, but it wasn't. Why? How do we know that it wasn't? Because after the children of Israel heard the first two commandments from the voice of God himself, they said to Moses, look, no, we can't take it. If we hear any more, we'll die. You hear for us, because we're afraid. Now, what does that actually mean? It means that they'd reached their limits, that they knew that if they received any more light, it would be for themselves alone, and they didn't want, and they stayed firm in their faith and told Moses, you go do it for us, and we have to get further away. We'll listen from afar. And Moses was, oh, come on, you couldn't receive the Torah from God. But they said no. In fact, God praised them for that, because they knew their limits. They knew that they would fall into, it could get out of hand. It was too much. They knew their limits and they stayed back. So at the toe of Mount Sinai, they knew what to do. However, 40 days later, is time for that faith to be wearing thin, maybe. The effort involved in faith is certainly big effort. And there was an element in the crowd, in the Jewish people, which was called the Eruv Rav. Now, the Zohar tells us that the origin of the sin of the golden calf was not in the children of Israel. The origin of the sin of the golden calf was actually in the Eruv Rav. And in fact, God at one point in Exodus and Shemot, I can't remember precisely where, but he sort of says to Moses, are you sure you want these guys? Because they were other slaves who'd been in Egypt, and they were not Jewish in origin. They were idol worshippers, as they all were at that point. And they sort of came out with the children of Israel. They were not included in the camp of the Israelites. They were tagged on at the back. Nevertheless, they certainly influenced them. And this is what actually happened. And I think this is very interesting, that Shrivat Kelim can, in a way, happen not from your own desire, but because you're influenced by wrong company. And this, it seems to be what happened with the golden calf. The Eruv Rav were the ones who came to Aaron and said, we want you to make a golden calf for us. And so we want, and why did they want it? Because they were received to receiving. They were used to receiving. They weren't used to giving, and they didn't really have the vessels for it or the capacity for it. Now, the children, Rabbi Ashlag talks about this. He says, how was it that the children of Israel were able to come to Mount Sinai through the aspect of giving, through K'ish Echad B'Lev Echad? How were they able to do that? And the answer is because they had that capacity through the Zchut Avot. Because that was their Yerusha, that was their inheritance that they received from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That was their inheritance. They were able to give unconditionally to God and to each other and come together at Mount Sinai, K'ish Echad B'Lev Echad, because they had Zchut Avot. Because that was what they were given by their ancestors, by the fathers. But the Eruv Rav didn't have that. And there they were, and they received these great visions, and it was like they got addicted. All right? Because if you're not receiving for the sake of giving, you get addicted. And they were kind of addicted. And here they were 40 days later, and they're like, oh my God, I need another dose. All right, they wanted the great light again, and the only way they knew was through idol worship. And there's a whole thing in the Zohar about how they tricked Aaron, okay, and out came the golden calf. And what was the sin of the children of Israel? If it wasn't they who did it, the sin was they didn't stop it. They didn't protest. They didn't stop it. They allowed this negative company to kind of, this bad influence to be there, to do what they wanted to do. They didn't stop it. They didn't rebel against it. And that was the sin of the golden calf. When we allow the negative, when we associate with bad company and get ourselves very influenced in negative ways, and that doesn't have to be physical nowadays. It could be over the internet, media, plenty of that around. Okay, so I think the sin of the golden calf is, again, it's something to look at another way in which vessels which should be only used for holiness, for the sake of giving, end up being used by the framework of evil. All right? Any questions? I've been talking for ages. Any questions? Everybody okay? So far, so good? All
Okay.
right. Good. All right. Let's have a look at you've got the sin of the spies. All right. I was trying to think about that one today. And, my mind was such a blank with feeling hungry and thirsty. I wasn't getting too far. But the sin of the spies, again, is a type of vessels which should be used in holiness being used for the framework of evil. Should they really have spied out the land? What did they need to spy it for? I mean, these are the people who have witnessed, okay, all the incredible miracles with which God took them out of Egypt, from being downtrodden slaves. They gone out with gold, with Rechush Gadol, with great vessels. They witnessed the destruction of the Egyptians on the Red Sea. They witnessed the battle against the Amalekites. They were stood there at Mount Sinai. Okay? The building of the Mishkan. And now they're saying, 1 minute, is this land really good? Are you sure we should go there? Maybe the people there aren't going to be so nice to us. I mean, it doesn't make sense, does it? What were they doubting? What was the whole issue of the sin of the spies? There's lots of different interpretations, but it's like what seemed to me today was like when we should be giving our faith and should be giving our trust in the framework of holiness, we're holding back. Okay? We've already been given enough encouragement by God, enough positive signs that that's where we should be going, and yet, are you sure? We need a gushtamper on it, we need the badatz on it, we need this hechsher, that hechsher. That seems to me what the sin of the spies is about. That instead of using their vessels for faith and for joy, we're going up to Eretz Israel, finally! The dream for 200 and something years of being downtrodden as slaves. Finally, God's taking us there. They kind of lost enthusiasm and they started to question. And that's why, they wanted to spy out the land, and whatever they spied out, they brought back a negative report. Was it negative? Did they say anything that wasn't true? No, they said everything was true enough. I'm pretty sure it was true. but the connotation they put on it was very, very negative. So it's kind of like the story we tell ourselves. They told themselves a story. Am I telling myself a story to enhance the framework of holiness, or am I telling myself a story which is going to take my vessels out of holiness and use them for the negative? And then, of course, Korach's rebellion. There's Korach. I mean, you've got 600,000 males. Okay, so add on the women and the children and the whatever. You've got a few million people there. Okay? And out of all those few million people, Korach's family, his tribe, the Levites, have been chosen to serve in the Mishkan. Not bad going, huh? So what is he complaining about? There's a million people over there who haven't been chosen to serve in the Mishkan. But he doesn't look at that. He only looks at what he hasn't got, not what he has got. Okay? And so he rebels out of jealousy, out of envy. And you can really see how he not only doesn't bring those vessels of negativity into holiness, but he deliberately feeds them. We're all born with the negative. So he was born envious and jealous and all those things. We all get stuff. So Korach got some stuff. Okay? But instead of Ba'alitahem Masayinoto trying to purify it, trying to come to terms, trying to deal with what he was been given to deal with. And remember, again, very big vessels, very powerful man. Okay? Instead of trying to deal with it, he gives into it completely. He identifies with his framework of evil. So here we've got somebody who's got the two sides of himself. He's got the soul and he's got the ego. And he's just definitely identified with his pride, with his anger, with his envy. Okay? And so he takes and misleads other people. I think 250 of them offered up false incense and then they all burnt. Okay? Other people died with him. And he causes havoc because he cannot deal with his own vessels of envy and jealousy, and instead of dealing with them, he gives them more power. And that's exactly what happens, that when we don't do our work and bring the vessels into the framework of holiness, they suck the power, and more negativity goes into the framework of evil, which then grows. And now, of course, we come to Shiva Tammuz, okay, which was what we saw, that today that the first temple was destroyed due to bloodshed, adultery and idol worship. And I can't think of the first temple. We actually don't appreciate today what the first temple really was. It absolutely was a channeling for the light of God. The Shekhinah was present there. When the people offered up the sacrifice, they had instant feedback in the smoke of the sacrifice, whether they were doing the korban in purity or not. If it was in purity, they saw the form of a lion crouched over in the smoke of the sacrifice, eating it. And the lion is the symbol of chesed, of loving kindness, of the right hand line. And if it wasn't, if they weren't doing it properly, then they saw a dog over the sacrifice. And the presence of the Shekhinah was there. And it just got destroyed because instead of valuing the holiness there, we had the complete opposite. And the second temple, it was interesting. They kept every little iota of ritual law. I mean, they knew the difference between Tameh and Tahor. They really did. Unclean and pure. We don't know those differences any longer. We've lost it. But they really knew it, and they really kept it. and yet causeless hatred. They weren't using this holiness to bring people together, but to be proud and to drive people apart, which is, we saw as the exact opposite what happened in the giving of the Torah. So all these examples that we've looked at today is to actually look for Shvirat HaKelim within ourselves. It's what is when our powers, whatever powers we've been given, okay, and we've all been given unique qualities, unique powers, unique abilities, and we should be using them for Kedusha, okay, for holiness, and bringing elements of our negative sides into Kedusha. And instead of doing that, we're using them for wrong purposes. So we've got our positive powers, which should be used only for Kedusha, being used for the negative. And we've got that the negative stuff within us is being enhanced in other ways and not being brought into holiness. So these are the Shvirat HaKelim, which we all have to look at within ourselves. Okay, and this is why we're taught all these events, so that we should find them within ourselves and learn from them. And the period of mourning that we have now is to actually mourn not for the walls of the outer Jerusalem, but for the outer temple, the physical temple, but to mourn for our inner Jerusalem. Our inner Jerusalem is the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah that dwells within each and every one of us, the divine within each and every one of us. Okay? And this whole period of mourning from Shivas B'Tammuz to Tisha B'Av is precisely to do with mourning our inner Jerusalem. Okay? That's what we need to be doing. Looking at where am I not serving the Shekhinah? Where am I serving the Klipot instead of the Shekhinah? Okay? And this is called Shechinta Ba'afa, the Shekhinah in the dust. And Bezrat Hashem, through the purpose of mourning and paying attention to the Shvirat HaKelim within ourselves, okay, hopefully we can mend the Kelim. Let's take these 3 weeks looking at that and mending the Kelim and taking our powers to bring our Kelim into Kedusha. All right? All right, my dear ones.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Uh-huh.
Let's get, how do I do stop? Oh, stop share.
Okay.
All right. Any further any questions? Any ideas? Oh, Yocheved said, thanks very much and Shabbat Shalom. Wonderful, yes.
I want to say thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome, Solchi. You're very welcome. Very nice.
Thank you.
All right. Now, everybody, listen. I won't be here next week, okay? I'm doing a kind of good book launch. Hooray! For my new book, okay? And it's taking place on a Zoom thing in America, and precisely at this time. So I talked about it with Maya. I can't really find another time next week, I don't think. All right? So we're going to have to give it a miss next week, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
Okay.
All right?
Okay, B'ezrat Hashem, Shabbat Shalom. I wish that book could launch well. That book deserves to be launched everywhere.
Amen. Yeah.
B'ezrat Hashem.
Yeah, but B'ezrat Hashem, it's a good opportunity in the States. I'm glad to have it. It's a, what's it say? Not 5? I don't know what that means.
Where is the book launch?
Oh, to give. Yes, Reba says God. Yes, God wants us to be giving unconditionally. Just as He's giving unconditionally, we also have to try to be giving in kind, unconditionally. It's not so easy because we also have the framework of evil within ourselves. We've got both. So yeah, it's tricky.
I really appreciated the psychological bit.
Sorry, Reba?
I really appreciated the psychological angle.
I think it's,
that you
yes,
took.
I think Shvirata Kelim is fascinating, actually. The more
Thank
you go
you.
into it, the more interesting it is. Yes, there's so much there. Like when you start looking at these different events from that perspective, you begin to see what a message each one has for us.
I have some thoughts. They're my own personal, for my own personal filters. When it comes to choosing the framework of good or holiness or the framework of evil, a lot of it has to do with ability to think constructively and positively. And in
Yes,
order for that, you have to have some energy. You have to have enough sleep. If you don't have enough sleep, you're not going to have the power to uplift your thoughts to a holy place. If you're weary, your thoughts will tend to default to negativity and not positivity. And if you're not positive, you're not going to have much chance of fulfilling the holy mitzvot, because it's easier to find an excuse than it is to fulfill them. And it's hard to fight the Yetzer Hara when you're tired. It kind of, I think of like a baby. Babies are generally happy human beings, but when they get tired, they start crying, and they cry and cry till they fall asleep and get the sleep they need to come back to a more positive state. We don't cry, but we tend to think more negative thoughts, and then we start being critical, and then by the time we're critical, we put doubt in place of what should be an opportunity to do something that's a mitzvah, or to think in a kind way. We just, because we're too worn out to think kindly and to think positively. So my point is that sleep is important. You've got to buoy yourself up. You've got to have good nutrition, and that all works together with staying in a place of Kedusha.
that's absolutely right. I mean, the Rambam said so, definitely. The Rambam absolutely said that we need to look after our physical health, because otherwise we simply can't do the mitzvahs. It's an absolute, complete requirement. I completely agree with you. Definitely. There's no question about that. Yeah. So thank you for reminding us of that. Zippy, it's very important.
I had a
There's
question,
another-
Yadida, just real quick.
I
Sorry.
can see you on the. Oh, that was nice. I saw you for a minute on the video.
I was curious, when you put the morning of our inner Jerusalem on that list, was it like a separate thing from that bottom part, or was it part of the doing it within ourselves? Like, was it meant to be a part of that list, or just like a separate idea?
Well, it was just like I can't remember now. Let me have a look.
I was just so curious.
I can't remember what.
Yeah,
No,
so the last
I felt that it's sort of like a work for us to do now. I don't think it's really part of the list. You're there. You're right. It's there.
because at first I took it like, for some reason, like my mind went with like, oh, is mourning the inner Jerusalem part of that list, like part of like us feel like, should we not do that? I was thinking of it as like a double negative, but I realized
No. It was I sort of like made this list kind of like for my own.
I figured that. Yeah, that's why I was asking.
Yeah, no,
I
it
kind
should
of
be
assumed it.
separate. Yeah, it's
Okay.
what we should be doing now. It's a positive thing. To mourn for the inner Jerusalem is a positive thing, because
That's
when
what
we
I thought,
mourn for
yeah.
Jerusalem, our inner Jerusalem, we begin to see where we're going wrong, and then of course we can correct it. And there's a beautiful saying which says, "He who mourns for Jerusalem will merit to see its being rebuilt."
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we
Amen.
need to. It's a work. I think that between Shivasa B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av is what's called the 3 weeks. Okay, so we have the 3 weeks where we take this opportunity to look at the brokenness, the negative place. All right, it's a time of. It's not a comfortable time. Okay, it's a time to look and see where we're going wrong. Okay,
Yes.
It's different from tshuva, I think. Month of Elul, tshuva is a place of reconciliation. Here, it's before reconciliation. Here, before you can, when you've done something wrong, you may had a quarrel with your partner, for example. So the first thing to do is to figure out, to admit where we've gone wrong, okay? And that's the first step, to say, I was wrong, I did whatever, okay? And that's the place that we're in right now. These 3 weeks is an opportunity to look and see where we did wrong. In Elul, when we get to Tshuva is coming back to a place of love. Here, the fulfillment of making up. Here, we first of all got to identify the negative. Where are we breaking the vessels? Where are we taking vessels which should be in holiness and using them for the negative? Okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great.
I appreciate. I was participated last year when I was there, but I'm way more educated in it now. So I fasted today with a lot more kavanah than before, and so I remember it feeling really profound with it last time I was there, and I traveled to Jerusalem on Tisha B'Av. It was the first time I think I'd fasted, and
wow.
As an adult, with intention, and and so it was really, really interesting. So I went there just to be there last year just for that.
That's amazing.
Thank you so much
I find the summer fast quite difficult because you can't drink. But anyhow, they're quite tricky. But usually by Yom Kippur, it's got a little bit cooler. So
makes me a stronger person.
But Baruch Hashem, we made it through. And the fasting is definitely a work. There was 2 more chats came in. Okay, thank you, Dida. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And Kathy says thank you, and so does Devorah King. Okay, lovely. Beautiful. All right, everyone. Be well.
Shabbat
Stay
Shalom.
well. Have a Shabbat Shalom.